The night is silent, but only because the screaming has already stopped. In the cold emptiness of a ravaged steppe village, smoke coils upward like the last breath of a dying world. The year is uncertain, the location forgotten, and the witnesses long buried beneath centuries of dust. But the memory of what happened here still hangs in the air like a curse. It always begins this way when the Mongols arrive. A dark wind, a tremor under the earth, and then nothing but the sound of hoofbeats approaching like an omen whispered by a vengeful sky. They say the Mongol Empire was forged by discipline, strategy, intelligence. But there's a side of the story the chronicles rarely speak of, a side drenched not in glory, but in the kinds of horrors men prefer never to imagine, especially what they did to the women they captured. Behind the clean, heroic lines of official history lies something feral, something primal, something deliberately hidden by both victors and victims, because some truths are too disturbing to repeat, even after 800 years. Imagine standing there as the riders descended, women clutching their children, young girls trembling behind broken doors, mothers whispering prayers to gods who no longer answered. The Mongols didn't hesitate. They didn't negotiate. They didn't see these women as people, as wives, as daughters, as mothers. They saw them as spoils of war, flesh to be claimed, bodies to be used, souls to be broken. Some were taken immediately, dragged by their hair into the shadows behind collapsed walls. Others were lined up, evaluated like livestock, age, beauty, obedience, sorted into groups depending on what purpose they would serve. The commanders took the youngest, the elite guard selected the strongest, the rest were given to the soldiers as reward. But the worst fate was reserved for those who resisted. Their screams carried across the night until even the horses shivered. What makes this darkness truly unbearable is not just the brutality, but the intention behind it. The Mongols understood something chilling. To break a civilization, you do not start with its warriors, you start with its women. You corrupt the womb, you stain the bloodline, you fracture the future. And that is where our journey begins. The air after a Mongol raid is thick, not with smoke alone, but with the weight of despair. The ground itself seems to remember the screams, the overturned carts, the torn garments, left like trophies of a nightmare no one can wake from. You might imagine warriors taking pride in their conquests, but in the shadows, behind the banners and the symbols of empire, there is a methodical cruelty that chills the mind. It is not chaos, it is precision, a strategy honed over decades, centuries even, by a people who understood terror as a weapon, as powerful as a sword or a bow. Women who survived the initial onslaught often discovered that the real horror had only just begun. Captured, stripped of everything familiar, they were marched across frozen plains, sometimes for weeks, their cries swallowed by the wind. Hunger gnawed at their bones, fatigue paralyzed their limbs, and always, the looming knowledge that at the end of this forced journey they would be claimed, owned, by strangers whose only law was domination. Some accounts, carefully hidden in dusty scrolls or whispered in forgotten villages, describe the rituals of selection. Not all soldiers acted on instinct. There were overseers who catalogued the captives, who ensured that fear and obedience were absolute. The Mongol commanders understood something the kings of Europe could not. Terror leaves a deeper mark than death, and by targeting women, by bending the fragile lines of humanity, they sought not just victory on the battlefield, but total annihilation of identity, of lineage, of hope. And yet, there were fragments of resistance, quiet defiance, a whispered prayer, a hidden blade, a child smuggled to safety. These acts were small, almost invisible, but they are what history often erases, because they remind us that, even in the darkest chapters, human courage flickers like a stubborn candle refusing to die. The Mongols themselves recorded little of these events in their triumphs. The tales that survive come from those who lived through them, and their words drip with horror, disbelief, and sorrow. Reading them now, centuries later, you cannot help but feel the cold touch of history pressing against your own spine. You are a witness to crimes too calculated, too deliberate to be explained away as mere savagery. They were warnings, lessons, punishments, etched into human memory in blood and fear, and this is only the beginning. The true depths of their cruelty, the intimate horrors reserved for those who could not flee, have been buried deliberately by time, by culture, by shame. Yet here, now we can begin to unearth them. The steppe itself seems complicit, vast and indifferent, stretching endlessly, as if to swallow every cry, every desperate plea. For the women who survived the initial capture, the journey was a slow descent into a nightmare, where each day was measured in fear, humiliation, and the constant presence of predators in human form. The Mongols did not simply conquer land, they conquered bodies, reshaped lives, and shattered the fragile structures of society that had once provided protection. Entire villages were emptied of men, their leaders executed or impaled, and the women left exposed, a terrifying demonstration of power that reached beyond the battlefield. Historical fragments tell of forced separations, where mothers were torn from daughters, sisters from brothers, each assigned to distant camps or elite households. The young, the beautiful, the strong, they were selected, catalogued, and claimed with a methodical precision designed to erase identity. What horror lies in knowing that the same men who fought with arrows and steel also wielded domination as a weapon, understanding that to break a people completely, you must first break its women. The psychological torment was as deliberate as the physical. Fear became routine, obedience, survival, resistance almost unthinkable. There are accounts hidden in the archives of monasteries or tucked away in the memoirs of foreign travellers that hint at ceremonies so grotesque they defy comprehension. Women forced to perform acts meant to humiliate, to enforce submission, to strip them of their dignity and reduce them to instruments of conquest. Some were given to soldiers in endless rotations, their lives measured in hours of service, their existence a perpetual torment designed to crush hope. Others, deemed unfit or rebellious, faced punishments so cruel that even the soldiers occasionally recoiled. And yet amidst the horror, there are whispers of courage that refuse to die. A young woman hiding her child beneath straw, a silent rebellion passed in glances, secret alliances formed in the shadows. These were the sparks of humanity that the Mongols could not fully extinguish. They remind us that even in the darkest oppression, there is a pulse of resistance, fragile but undeniable. To truly understand the scale of this terror, one must imagine it not as isolated acts, but as a systematic strategy. Each raid, each capture, each assault on women was part of a broader design to subjugate, to terrorize, to dominate civilizations without mercy. And as we peer into these forbidden corridors of history, we begin to see that the Mongols' legacy was written not only in victories and empires, but in shattered lives and silenced voices. By the time the Mongols reached the fortified cities, the women who survived the open plains were already hollowed out by fear, exhaustion, and relentless abuse. They were no longer simply captives, they were instruments of a strategy so cruel it transcended ordinary warfare. In the great halls of conquered rulers, the Mongols established hierarchies of possession. Commanders claimed the finest women for their personal quarters. Soldiers took what remained, and the rest were left in limbo, neither alive nor free, existing only to remind others of the cost of defiance. Imagine standing in a courtyard, surrounded by strangers whose eyes measure every glance, every flinch, every thought that might betray disobedience. The Mongols understood the power of dominance, the terror of anticipation. They orchestrated fear as carefully as they planned battles. A woman never knew when she might be summoned, when she would be forced to comply, or when she might witness horrors designed to instill obedience in those who came after. The steppe had taught them to be efficient, to strike swiftly, but in cities they became architects of psychological torment. Every act was calculated to break the human spirit, to instill submission, and to leave a permanent scar on the collective memory of a people. Historical accounts, often fragmented and veiled in euphemism, describe ceremonies of possession and brutal punishment. Women were paraded, judged, divided. Beauty, youth, strength, these were criteria for selection. Resistance brought death, mutilation, or the slow erosion of body and mind through constant abuse. The Mongols wielded terror not only as a weapon of conquest, but as a means of control over entire populations, ensuring that no one could rise again without first confronting the shadow of this calculated cruelty. Yet even in the depths of despair, fragments of resistance flickered. Some women learned to navigate the system, trading obedience for survival, planting seeds of defiance in hidden places. Letters smuggled, children secretly nurtured, whispered prayers preserved. They are the ghostly echoes of lives that refuse to vanish completely. These acts, small yet defiant, reveal the unbearable truth of history, that human resilience, though fragile, is almost impossible to erase entirely. To witness the horrors inflicted on women by the Mongols is to confront an ancient reality that challenges our sense of morality and humanity. The violence was deliberate, intimate, and far-reaching, stretching beyond the battlefield to corrupt the very essence of civilization. And yet, as unspeakable as it was, it survives today in the fragments of testimony, waiting for those willing to look, to remember, and to understand at the darkness that history often tries to hide. In the aftermath of conquest, when the fires had burned out and the bodies were buried or abandoned to the winds, the women who survived carried scars unseen by the world. Their hands, once gentle, now trembled with memories. Their eyes, once full of life, reflected the endless nights of terror. The Mongols had claimed more than their land. They had claimed their minds, their sense of safety, their very identities. And yet, these women endured. They endured because there was no alternative, because survival demanded a resilience that was forged in the crucible of unimaginable cruelty. The Mongols' understanding of terror was not mere instinct, it was studied, refined, applied with deliberate intention. They recognized that conquering a people required more than annihilating armies. It required controlling hearts, corrupting lineages, and breaking the invisible threads that held communities together. Women, in their vital role within families and society, became both the weapon and the battlefield. By dominating them, the Mongols ensured that the echo of their cruelty would resonate through generations, a silent, haunting reminder that defiance came at the cost of unspeakable suffering. In hidden chronicles and scattered reports, there are whispers of those who attempted escape, who resisted in whatever ways they could. Some succeeded, disappearing into the wilderness, leaving behind traces of hope for the next generation. Others were caught, punished in ways so calculated and intimate that the memory of it could never be fully erased. The psychological toll was deliberate. Even the strongest spirit could be bent, twisted, and reshaped under the relentless pressure of fear, submission, and the constant threat of violence. Yet paradoxically, the very acts of cruelty reveal the fragility of the oppressors themselves. Every calculated assault, every strategic humiliation, was a recognition that their power depended not only on swords and horses, but on fear, obedience, and the willingness of the conquered to endure. The Mongols understood that terror could build empires as effectively as armies, but it also required maintenance, vigilance, and the constant reassertion of dominance. As we peer into these dark corridors of history, we are confronted with a chilling truth, that civilization itself can be weaponized through the systematic destruction of innocence and dignity. And the women who endured, who survived the relentless machinery of conquest, are testaments to both the depths of human cruelty and the indomitable force of human resilience, time has a way of burying horrors, folding them beneath layers of legend, myth, and propaganda. But the acts committed against women by the Mongols refuse to remain silent. Their legacy lingers in every scar, every hidden trauma, every story passed down in whispers. To study these events is to confront the parts of history we often wish to forget, the truths so disturbing that even chroniclers dared only hint at them. And yet, if we ignore them, we risk forgetting not only the suffering, but the lessons they carry about power, control, and the fragility of civilization. These women, stripped of freedom, dignity, and sometimes even their identities, became living instruments of fear. The Mongols understood that domination begins with the body, but it does not end there. To conquer entirely, one must corrupt the mind, shatter hope, and manipulate every aspect of existence. And they did so with precision, ensuring that the memory of their cruelty would echo long after the horses had gone and the banners had faded. Even today, scholars and historians can only piece together fragments of the full horror because so much was deliberately erased, silenced, or disguised as routine conquest. Yet within these shadows of despair, glimmers of defiance survived. Small acts of courage, a hidden prayer, a whispered secret, a child rescued from certain death, testify to the resilience of those who endured. History does not always record their names, but their survival, their persistence, is a testament to the human spirit's stubborn refusal to be extinguished, even in the face of calculated terror. As we reflect on these events, it becomes clear that the Mongols' true weapon was not the sword alone, nor the arrow, nor the unyielding cavalry charge. Their weapon was fear, wielded against women as both a tool and a message. Compliance, obedience, and silence are enforced through suffering. And yet, the very existence of survivors, the very preservation of memory through hidden stories and fragmented accounts, reminds us that cruelty, no matter how thorough, cannot fully erase humanity. To look upon this history is to stand at the edge of darkness, to witness the extremes of human power and depravity, and to confront a truth often glossed over in tales of conquest, that the real victims were not only lands taken or armies destroyed, but the lives, bodies, and souls of women, those whose suffering shaped the very fabric of empires, and whose courage, though often invisible, endured across centuries. The past is never truly silent. It waits, patient and unforgiving, for those who dare to listen.